Introduction to the Old Testament, Unit 12, From Judge to King. We begin with Ruth. Now, in the English Bible, Ruth comes right after Judges. In the Hebrew Bible, it is put in the third section. I think it's best that we discuss it in the era of the Judges. It takes place in that time. And Ruth is an interesting one because it shows us faithful people in the time of so much apostasy. Ruth is a story of Naomi and her family, and the purpose is to show when people are faithful, God is faithful. It provides a contrast to the book of Judges, showing that faithfulness survived in Israel among some of the common folk. God preserved such families of faithfulness, and that is the very background from which David came. The major themes that we will find in Ruth is the kinsman redeemer and the concept of Hasid. The book begins with the apparent absence of God's presence, indicated by the famine and resulting in Israelites leaving the land. It is not hard to understand God's absence in light of the setting in the Judges period. Nevertheless, the book shows that God is still present with His people. In this case, where we have Naomi and Ruth, and God demonstrates His faithfulness. Now, as we look at the book of Ruth, we see that there is a family that moves from Bethlehem to Moab. The reason for this is that there is a famine in the land. Usually when we think of famine, we think of disobedience and the punishment that God is inflicting on the people. Well, Naomi and her husband Elimelech and their two sons Mahlon and Chilion left Bethlehem and they went to Moab. But then Elimelech, the husband of Ruth, died, and she was left with her two boys. They both married Moabite wives, and then they both died. So she is left as a widow. They are both widows. She has heard that there is food in Judah, so she decides that she will return to her homeland. She starts off with her two daughters-in-law, but then she recommends that they return to their father's home and find husbands for themselves. Orpah kissed Ruth and left. She went back to her mother's home, but Ruth does not want to leave her. And we see in Ruth a statement of conversion from the Moabite gods to the God of Israel. She tells Naomi, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." And it says, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Now it's interesting that in the text here, Ruth says, "May Yahweh deal with me." Now this is the personal name of Israel's God. So it looks like she has decided she will leave her background with the Moabites and she will enter into a new experience with Naomi in Israel. And so they went on and they came to Bethlehem. And it says that when they came there, the city was disturbed. And the women said, "Can this be Naomi?" And she answers them, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara," which means sort of cursed. It's bad. I went away full and I am coming back empty. So she is a little discouraged because of what has happened to her. But then in chapter 2, we are introduced to a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. He is going to be very prominent in this story. Ruth said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." And we know from the Deuteronomic material that a person was not supposed to glean up to their very border, but they were to leave some for the poor and the strangers, the foreigners who lived in the land. So this is what Ruth wants to do. And Naomi said to Ruth, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. So she goes out with the permission of Naomi, and it says that she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. And just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they called back. And then Boaz asked the foreman, "Whose young woman is that?" So when you go to your field and you find someone there that you hadn't seen before, you want to know, what are they doing here? And so the foreman said, "She is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." And so Boaz then speaks to her and encourages her. In chapter 2, verse 8, Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." And so he is taking charge of her. It is difficult for a young woman to protect herself in a field where there is no one to watch out for her. And so he's making sure that nothing happens to Ruth. He has heard about her and what she has done for her mother-in-law, Naomi. Ruth continues in the fields of Boaz, both for the barley harvest and for the grain harvest. And then about this time, Naomi decides she needs to do something for Ruth. Ruth is a widow. She is young. She needs a husband. And so Naomi tells Ruth that she is to prepare herself and go to the threshing floor at night. And it's interesting what takes place here in chapter 3. Naomi said, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours?" Now this introduces us to the kinsman redeemer concept. We are told in the law that if a woman marries and her husband dies and she has no children, that the brother of her husband is to marry her and raise up an heir for the deceased husband. Now this is what Boaz then is supposed to do. And so she goes to the threshing floor. She's put on her best clothes, and she is told by Naomi, don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. And during the night, Boaz wakes up and he notices that there's something strange. There is a woman lying with him. And he finds out that this is Ruth. And it says, I am your servant Ruth in verse 9. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. Now she is suggesting here that they consummate the marriage. If he is a kinsman redeemer, then he has an obligation to sexually satisfy her. But he indicates that there is another person who is closer to her than he is. And so he says, stay here during the night, and in the morning I will see if this other fellow will redeem you. If he does, okay. Otherwise, I will take care of it. And so it says that they got up early in the morning before anyone could recognize anyone. And he gave her some grain to take back to her mother-in-law. He says to her, don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. And he gave her 6 measures of barley. And then he went into the city, and she went back to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Chapter 4 tells us about Boaz went to the town gate. Now this is usually where activity of business was carried on. It says, when the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. And then Boaz also had 10 of the men as witnesses to come over. And he mentions Naomi, who came back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if not, tell me, so I'll know, for there is no one that has the right to it except you, and I am next in line. And so this fellow says, okay, I'll redeem it. And then Boaz mentions, well, when you get the property, you also get Ruth, the Moabitess, and you must perform the rite of kinsman redeemer. And the fellow says, I can't do it. It will jeopardize what I already have. And what this really means is, if he takes the property and marries Ruth, he then has 2 estates, not just one. The marriage with Ruth is separate. And then when he dies, the property that Ruth has goes to her heir, and it doesn't go to his family. And so he doesn't take on this responsibility. So then Boaz assumes the responsibility. He says in verse 9, Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear." So Boaz is assuming full responsibility as kinsman redeemer. And then the elders said, "We are witnesses." And they also say, "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." And so Boaz married Ruth, and then we have listed the genealogy in chapter 4, verse 18. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Ovid, and Ovid the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. So in the book of Ruth, we are introduced to the line of David. I mentioned that we would discuss the term Hasid in the book of Ruth, because this is where it is very clearly pointed out. It's usually related to covenant reality. The Hebrew term envelops all the far-ranging implications of Yahweh's loyalty to the Israelites. The King James Version frequently translates the term mercy, while the New American Standard Bible chooses the compound term loving kindness. These only begin to introduce all the varied ways whereby God demonstrates his covenant loyalty. In fact, if I am not mistaken, Nelson Glick did his thesis, his doctoral dissertation, on the word Hesed. It has so many different implications. In the New International Version, there are a number of terms used: kindness, love, loyalty, and more. Ruth is a book based on both the human and the divine levels. And the most explicit statement of this is found in Ruth's stirring expression of commitment to Naomi in chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. And this is where she says that she is going to be with Naomi wherever she goes and wherever she lives, and that she is going to serve Naomi's God, and that where Naomi dies, she will die. The issue of Chesed serves as the premise for the discussion between Boaz and Ruth as negotiations are made. The Lord's Hesed is introduced in chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, as the factor that will eventually lead to the successful remarriage of Naomi's daughter-in-law, so that it cannot help but be recognized in the provision of a Goel, or the kinsman redeemer, for Ruth. All this demonstrates that chesed to one another is among the most fitting vehicles God can use to display his own chesed. This again provides a contrast to the book of Judges, to which loyalty within the bounds of the covenant is scarce. So Ruth is a fitting contrast to the book of Judges.